Mike Pence. Mr. Vice President, welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thanks, Hugh. Great to be with you.
I've got 10 questions for you, only 10, starting with the easiest one. The 1918 influenza went through a dozen passages, mutations, I think is how a layman would call it, during the summer of 18. It came out more deadly in the fall. So the first question is, the disease thus far, except for very rare and very tragic cases, has spared children, thank God, and young adults. Is there anything you've heard in these briefings with these scientists, these amazing scientists and doctors, that would lead you to believe the virus is mutating in a way that worries you that it might be growing deadlier for children?
Well, first, foremost, our hearts grieve for the more than 70,000 Americans that have been lost to the coronavirus, and there's not a day goes by that I don't think of those families, and as every American does. But each and every day that I've led the White House Coronavirus Task Force, we start out with the numbers. And what the scientists tell me at this point is that what we saw in the beginning continues to hold, and that is that for many people who contract the coronavirus, they'll have no symptoms or they'll have simply flu-like symptoms. But for seniors with serious underlying health conditions or with those with any immunodeficiencies, the threat of serious catastrophic consequences are very real. We're watching it very closely, particularly with regard to potential impacts on children. We're carefully evaluating the differences in the West Coast spread of the coronavirus and the East Coast spread of the coronavirus to determine whether or not there may have been slight differences even between those. But at this point, what the scientists continue to tell us is that what we thought in the beginning continues to be the case, that for younger, healthy Americans and that the risk of serious illness remains fairly low, even for people that contract the coronavirus. And that's one of the reasons when you see the phased reopening plan that President Trump put forward right from the beginning and throughout, there's a focus on seniors, on long-term care, and on vulnerable communities around the country. We want to make sure that we have the kind of testing in place to be able to identify people who have risk factors and to get them the health care and to do the kind of contact tracing and containment that we need to do in the days ahead.
Well, that is great news, because as bad as it is, if it had targeted children, we would be just wrapped in grief, and we already are. But it's not kids, so I'm glad to hear that.
Right.
Age is not. You're a good lawyer, Mr. Vice President. Age is not a suspect classification. So, do you anticipate guidance from government, state, local, federal, about adding age discrimination guidelines that might say these plane flights, for example, are only for 45 years and younger, so that people might feel better about traveling with groups that are naturally more resilient in the face of this virus?
I think it's a very interesting question. And, when we had conversations with the commissioners of the major university and college athletic associations not long ago, we talked about that they might consider asking some of the elderly alumni to consider taking a pass on some sporting events should they restart in the summer or in the fall. But we would leave those decisions to businesses, to state governors, to what we would determine to be most appropriate. I think the guidance that we've issued at this point in terms of the president's guidelines to open up America again are intended to create a framework for a safe and responsible reopening. And as I stand here today, 41 states have already announced their own plans, many of which directly draw from the president's guidance. We think all of which represent the kind of phased approach that was contemplated in the administration's proposals. And I must tell you, standing here today, despite the grievous losses, the truth is that even in hot spots around the country, hospitalizations are down, emergency room admissions are down. We even see the number of fatalities declining consistently over the last 6 days. And And that's all a tribute to the American people and the willingness of the American people to heed the federal guidelines that the president issued during that 45-day period of time, and to issue the ongoing guidance from federal and state authorities. So we've made great progress. We've slowed the spread. Most importantly, we've saved lives, Hugh, and that's a tribute. That's a tribute to the American people.
Now, this is in the category of small but important to parent questions. And I know from my daughter, this is important to her. And I'm an old lifeguard from Niles Waddell Pool and Warren, Ohio's Packard Park. These city pools are where kids come and gather every summer. They make an unbelievably hot summer possible to get through. Has the task force suggested maybe opening again? Age restricted, keep the older people away, keep the people who've got health compromised, but get the pools open for the kids?
Well, one of the things that we presented not long ago at a briefing for the White House Coronavirus Task Force was a study conducted by infectious disease experts at DHS that found that humidity and sunlight have a very, very positive effect in reducing the half-life of the coronavirus. And, we've shared that information with the public and with state governments. And I would just say that on all of those kinds of decisions, we just continue to urge people to look to their state and local authorities. But it should be a cause of encouragement that we don't know for sure. This is a new virus. We have not been through a summer season with it, but all of our health experts have at least speculated in discussions since I took this job that there is a possibility that, much like the flu and other viruses, that there'll be seasonal implications, and that we did produce that study that said that humidity and sunlight are our allies in this fight against the coronavirus. And so being outdoors and being able to enjoy the outdoors and the sunlight is a positive. But all of that, the progress we've made will continue to depend on a measure of social distancing, good hygiene, but the progress that we have made thus far is really been remarkable. And we do think that if the American people continue to put into practice the guidance of state and local officials and good common sense as we reopen states around the country, that we think we could be in a very different place by shortly after Memorial Day or early June.
Right. If you can get specific guidance on pools, I think a lot of parents will be very happy with the task force. Now, this is a suggestion disguised as a question, sort of like a Jeopardy game thing. And it really is for Mrs. Pence, who is one of the country's terrific teachers out there who loves their students. What about a general do-over year, Mr. Vice President, where everyone goes back to the grade they were in, whether it's K through grad school, so that, with some financial aid from the government, you don't lose half a year, colleges are assured of getting their tuition, kids are assured of getting it. Has anyone thought about a do-over year for education?
It is a suggestion disguised as a question, Hugh.
Yes.
And so I think it's... But education is a state and local function. But we're already beginning to have discussions with members of Congress in both parties about providing additional aid to states, and those would be decisions. But you mentioned my wife; she's a school teacher.
Yep.
Kind of you to mention her. But I'd like to just give a shout out. I think it's National Teacher Appreciation Day today, and to every one of the teachers that have been doing the distance teaching, using online platforms and FaceTime and Zoom to continue to educate their kids. I know my wife has been reviewing art submissions. She's an art teacher at an elementary school. But teachers have, a lot of times, many of whom have had families of their own that are home, have gone on and continued to teach. And anyone in the sound of my voice that is a teacher that's been out there teaching our kids through these difficult times, we just want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts. But I'll take your suggestion disguised as a question back into the conversation.
All right, one more of those, and then I'll go to straight questions. This is a 100-year event. Haven't had it in 100 years, and so maybe it requires a once every 100-year solution, and this is not very Republican when it comes to paying for this. How about a one-time net worth tax or a one-time wealth tax of 5 or 10%. I'd be willing to do that, Mr. Vice President. This is a crisis. Has anyone kicked around the idea of asking the people to whom the country has been great to one time dig deep into their wealth and pony up?
Well, look, President Trump has got our economic team working on a range of proposals, particularly as we look at what's commonly referred to as a Phase 4 legislative package. We actually think the way to jumpstart this economy is exactly the opposite, Hugh. We think now is the time for us to look at eliminating the payroll tax, to look at other possible tax reforms. I mean, look, the president often says this, and it's you can't say it too often. Is that this is what you said? It's a 100-year event. No one saw this coming. The impact on our economy, the impact on businesses large and small, and hardworking American families is utterly unprecedented in our lifetimes. And so we need to think boldly about how once we largely put the coronavirus in the past, which may well be in the months ahead, that we find ways to encourage investment, encourage growth, and encourage the American people to safely and responsibly return to work and return to all of the activities that we all enjoy as parts of communities. I really do believe that it'll be one of the primary focus of this president going forward is how do we safely and responsibly open up America again, but what policies are we going to be able to enact that will create the kind of investment that will create jobs and growth in this economy? One of the things the president's often talked about is allowing for the expensing once again of business costs for dining out. It's one of the ways that you can encourage businesses to have their employees start going back to restaurants and doing business at restaurants, as once was the case before that tax deduction was eliminated. But rather than raising taxes, I promise you, President Trump's going to use the full strength of the American economy, because this is a president who knows that growth will solve all of our problems. We get the American economy growing again, starting to grow in the third quarter, rolling in the fourth quarter, and as the president said, we think 2021 could be one of the most prosperous years for economic growth in American history.
I agree with that, but I don't want to raise marginal rates at all, and I'm for cutting taxes, but one-time dips into the net wealth of people. Now, just think about it. Now, let's turn to religious liberty, Mr. Vice President. Faith communities have to come together, and not just for their own souls, but for the work that they do for the lost and the least. And you know this as well as anyone. Now, the Attorney General has told me on this show that the government will intervene where local and state governments are discriminating specifically against religious organizations in a way that they aren't against others. Have you seen any patterns that disturb you here? And have you seen the DOJ doing what you want done with regard to what is an unconstitutional infringement of free exercise?
Well, I couldn't be more proud of the fact that the Justice Department weighed in on some action by the state of Virginia that was sanctioning a church with penalties for having had 16 people come to a Palm Sunday service in a sanctuary that seats about 250 people. Look, the liberties enshrined in the Constitution still apply to every American, even in the middle of a national emergency. And President Trump and our entire administration have championed religious liberty of every American, of every faith. And I couldn't be more proud of the Justice Department for standing up with that Virginia church that's challenging Governor Northam's ban on in-person religious services. Look, many states around the country in their reopen plans are allowing people to convene again at places of worship this weekend, and I have every confidence the American people are going to do that responsibly. We can do the social distancing. People can sit a couple of seats apart. I'm sure I'm sure churches and synagogues may consider adding additional services to be able to spread people out. But I would tell you the faith of the American people that has shined through the compassion and care of communities of faith through the course of this epidemic have been incredibly inspiring. And when our communities of faith are strong, America is strong, and the needs of our most vulnerable are cared for. And we've seen that throughout this epidemic.
Now, Mr. Vice President, most religious liberty cases are decided by federal district courts, not the courts of appeals, certainly not the Supreme Court. They don't have enough time. And we've got, I'm doing some special pleading here for California. We've got so many vacant district courts. People like Mark Scarsi have been nominated and had a hearing, but they haven't had a vote. People like Rick Richmond have been nominated. They haven't had a hearing. Even a Democrat like John Flynn is caught somewhere in the pipeline. Can you nudge Lindsey Graham and Pat Cipollone and even Senators Feinstein and Harris to get some California judges? Because we have just got courts that are not functioning.
Well, I will tell you because I've been around when he's done it. I mean, the Senate returned this week, House returns next week, but the Senate is where we confirm our court appointments. And other than the health and well-being of the American people in confronting the coronavirus, this president is going to continue to call on Democrats in the Senate to stop the obstruction. I don't know the exact number right now. We've got more than 150 administration appointees who are continuing to await administration action. The President Trump has, 2 Supreme Court justices and appointed a record number of judges to the Court of Appeals of any president in American history, but we've got some of the most outstanding nominees for our federal judiciary that have been waiting for months, and in some cases our appointments have been waiting for years. And it's time for Senator Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats to sit down at the table to clear these administration appointees, to get these judges on the bench. It's all going to be a part of how we get America moving again.
It is. Now I got 3 more. This is a hard one. The president and you at the Lincoln Memorial talked about China, and the president said that, look, the Chinese allowed people from Wuhan to fly to international destinations, but not within China, and he intimated that they may have done that knowingly for the purposes of spreading the disadvantage, the economic chaos. Are we in Cold War 2.0, Vice President Pence?
Well, let me say, President Trump's made it clear that we're going to get to the bottom of what happened in China and why it was that China and the World Health Organization did not inform the United States or nations around the planet of the real threat of the coronavirus. We've got our intelligence community working on that now. And I know we'll get to the bottom of the facts, but that we're going to hold, as the president's already suspended payments to the World Health Organization. The president's made it clear that at the right time, we're going to bring the facts to the American people, and we're going to hold China accountable. That being said, look, one of the enduring lessons that I think has broken through with the American people has been just how right President Trump has been for years about the need to reset our trading relationship with China first and with other nations around the world. And we've met the needs of our healthcare community. We've had what we call an air bridge that's flown 119 flights of supplies in from around the world, of masks and gloves and gowns. But one of the things going forward is we are going to be working very earnestly to bring back home and domestic production of these critical elements of our healthcare system. And but I think all of your listeners can be confident that President Trump, as he's done from day one, is going to continue to stand strong about the advantage that China has taken of the United States for decades to reset that relationship, but specifically on the coronavirus, we're going to get to the bottom of it, and we're going to hold those that did not play straight with the world accountable.
Well, you hesitated, though. You don't want to use the word Cold War 2.0, do you? And I don't understand why, but I understand diplomacy. Maybe it's not an opportune time to do it, but it does seem like among the masks that are at issue is the one that's coming off the CCP.
Well, look, we hope for a better relationship with China, but whether it be the imposition of tariffs, whether it be the way we've spoken out against human rights abuses by the People's Republic of China, the suppression of religious freedoms, the persecution of Christian pastors, of Muslim Uyghurs, confronting China with their ambitions in the South China Sea, and continuing to defend our commitment to freedom of navigation. We'll continue to make all of those stands. But from early on, the president forged a good working relationship with President Xi, and we continue to hope for better things in our relationship with China. But the American people can be confident this president, this administration, will continue to stand firm on behalf of our economy and on behalf of our most cherished ideals.
Two quick closing questions, Mr. Vice President, one political and one about sports. Campaign 2020 is upon us. Will you be recommending to the president that he allow the traditional television and cable networks, many of which are just off the rails, provide the questioners as opposed to the arbitration approach where the president names one and Vice President Biden names one and those two agree on a third? Because it just seems to me most of these networks, there's some exceptions, but most of them are off the rails.
Well, I'll leave that to the president, and I know that the debate commission been around for a while, and I'll leave that to the campaign. I would tell you, all of my energies continue to be consumed with the work that we've done on the White House Coronavirus Task Force, a task force that was stood up in January, stood up at roughly the same time that the president suspended all travel from China and bought our nation invaluable time to marshal our national response to save lives, slow the spread. But I must tell you that come this fall, whether it's in the debates or beyond, I welcome the opportunity to talk about this president and this administration's record in responding to this extraordinary pandemic and its impact on the American people. I think the president's provided the kind of leadership I've seen it day in and day out that has brought us to a moment where today we see light at the end of the tunnel. We see 41 states already announcing plans to reopen. And as I said, despite the fact that we mourn with those who mourn, 70,000 American families that have lost loved ones, when you look at what the projections were early on, with no mitigation, more than 1 million to 2 million losses. Even with mitigation, the President and I were told that we could lose between 100 and 240,000 Americans. But because of what the American people have done, because of the leadership the President has provided in full partnership with governors, we're on a path for much fewer losses, and I look forward to taking that case and the story of the great, extraordinary progress we made in the last 3.5 years to the American people this fall.
Well, I genuinely appreciate, I know the audience does, the hours and time, attention, concern, prayer that you have put into this, along with your colleagues. Just please nudge Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci to come back on the show because they're great. My very last question. Have you got any word on Major League Baseball? This is the Indians' year, Mr. Vice President. Are you going to be on the road for any first pitch days? Are you going to be out there throwing out the first pitch soon anywhere?
Boy, I sure hope so. And I know that Major League Baseball and all of our professional sports organizations are reviewing plans for how they can restart America. But it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine a summer without baseball in this country, as much as it's hard to imagine a fall without football. But as we all do our part, as we continue the social distancing, as we heed the guidance of state and local officials, as we do our part to responsibly reopen our states and our communities, every day we're one day closer back to back to enjoying every aspect of American life, including a great day at the ballpark. And,
Mr.
we'll
Vice
continue
President,
to work our hearts out to get to that day.
I am with the president in being in awe of your being able to answer a question without answering my question. Do you have any hint for baseball fans that maybe we get the game back soon?
I'm hoping that every single day. I hope to have a Coke and a hot dog in my hand and to be enjoying a good ball game, although I am a Cub fan.
I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm still bitter over 2016. But, Mr. Vice President, thank you for your time. You've been very generous. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Hugh, and thanks for all you've done to keep the public informed throughout these challenging times.
Our pleasure.
You've been exceptional.
Our real
God bless
pleasure.
you.
Be well.